want to keep going? Do you mind going to the next slide, Jessica? So this is sort of the why ELRP, and ELRP stands for Emergency Load Reduction Program. And as Peyton already described, there was some issues last summer. I think probably most people are aware of it, especially large C&I customers, is there was definitely some difficulties last summer with making sure that we had enough supply. And forecasts showed that we were going to have shortfalls this year as well, and possibly into the next few years. So there was a need, and so there was a proceeding put together in last fall to see what could be done, what kind of solutions could be put in place to try to address this and modulate load so that we don't have a gap between load and supply. The key solution is this emergency load response program. And the objective of it is to be able to work with non-residential customers. So I want to be clear that there's no residential customers in here. It's all targeted towards business customers. And in PG&E's territory, that also includes small and medium business. Not all the IOUs included small to medium business, but PG&E thought it was important to make sure that all business customers were able to participate. I think the sort of unique thing about the program is because it is about an emergency, it is looking for us to solve a problem. It really has been described as an all carrots, no stick program. And I would reinforce that. I've been in this industry for a long time, and I've not really seen programs that are truly all carrots and no stick. And this is an exception. I think it shows the importance of the program, but it also, I think, gives people who maybe have not been participating in demand response a chance to participate a bit with outs and downsides and test that out. On the bottom of this slide, we are referencing the proclamation of a state of emergency issued by the governor. That came out July 30th. And so this really is considered a state of emergency given everything that's going on with the wildfires and the extreme heat conditions. We're really using this program only for emergencies, but it will be used, is I guess the thing that I would like to say. This isn't something that's like, hey, it's a safeguard and we probably never will use it. We've already used it this summer. Jessica, do you want to keep going? Thank you. There are 4 key program goals here. And this really is maintaining system reliability. None of us want to have a problem like we've seen in some other areas. And key is preventing power interruptions during these grid emergencies. This is not the same as PSPS events, just to be clear. This is when we have a supply issue. So there could still be PSPS events, but by participating in ELRP, the goal is to reduce or eliminate power interruptions due to these other grid emergencies where we have a gap in supply. Definitely lowering the environmental impact by using load response as much as possible and providing financial incentives for participation. It's very clear that a lot of people participate in reducing their load when there is an emergency. People are following Flex Alert. People respond to things last summer when called. And this is an opportunity for people who are going to do something to help anyway, actually get financial incentives for that participation. Why don't we keep moving? To give you an idea of how it works, because I know that some people have participated a lot in demand response programs and some people have not. This is based on sort of standard demand response programs and the fact that there's a baseline. And the baseline is what's called 10 and 10. And I think Brian's going to discuss it a little bit more in some later slides. But the idea is that you're looking back in the last 10 like days. So you're looking at, if it's a Monday, you're looking at a Monday. If it's a weekend, Saturday and Sunday, because this program operates 7 days a week, then it would look back at a previous weekend. So just the message here is that you're looking at sort of like days and you're looking back in history to create the baseline. So as this slide illustrates, you're looking back and you have several days. So you see all the different, the diagram here that shows the different days where you're talking about 624, 625. You've gone back and looked at those days and you've averaged them because, every day is not going to be exactly the same. And Brian will talk a little bit more, but you basically throw out, if you had an event that doesn't also dampen your baseline, right? If there was an ELRP event, it doesn't count. You'll go back another day. But you're averaging those baselines and you create a adjusted energy baseline. So if you see that bright green line there, that's sort of the average. So that's what you would theoretically expect your business to do, or that account to do, I should say. And then in this particular example, and this is sort of a case study of something that we've seen, is the customer, the client said, okay, I think that I can reduce 50 kilowatts. And we are asking people to give a bit of a nomination, not because they're being held to it, like they're going to be punished if they don't meet that number, but so we can get a sense of how much might be able to come into this situation if there's a grid emergency. And there are some parameters, which I also think Brian's going to discuss in a little bit too, is that we really want to make sure that the window is that you would be able to do 50% of that. So in this particular case, somebody nominated 50 kW. For them to get paid, they would need to do 25 kW. And if you look at that pink line there, that is what happened on the day of an event. And 7-9 was an actual ELRP event. So that is what they did. And then if you look at the very bottom, we just flipped it to show the load reduction. And you can see that this site actually was able to reduce around the 50 kilowatts for the duration of the event and met their capacity nomination. So this is how baseline and performance calculations work. And so I think Brian will reiterate a little bit more specifically, but we wanted to give you an idea of how the payment would work. Do you want to go to the next slide, Jessica? Thank you. So in our model, we've also done some modeling as to, well, how much money would that be? Because it's without the baseline, it's a little bit harder to tell. It's not like, oh, I did this meter before. You have to really know that it's the baseline. But then you can go in and say, all right, well, how much money would I make? And the payments, the value stream is pretty straightforward, at least I think it is you're going to get, like if you're doing 1,000 kilowatts, you're going to, and you reduce 20 hours, you're going to get 20,000. If it's 40 hours, you're going to get 40,000. So that first top line there just describes the incentives, and it's a pretty simple calculation. There is the maximum of 60 events hours per year, not events, but event hours per year. And I believe there's 47 hours left this year. And the performance period is May through October. So this program is going to go on for 5 years. So there's some assurance that it's been approved by the CPUC for 5 years. But it's seasonally during the summer because of some summer reliability issues. So it's May 1st to October 31st. There is no guarantee, though, that events are going to be called. As you said, the idea is it's for emergencies. So to some extent, you hope you won't actually have an event. But I don't think that's going to be a problem in the near term. Depending on what rate you're on, and so we just used a TOU rate as an example here, one of the PG&E's TOU rates, you're also going to be reducing load. So you're going to get some form of net retail energy savings when you do this as well. And so if you look at this table, I think it's fairly straightforward, hopefully, is the number of hours that you've actually performed, your net bill savings, you get a total annual cash flow. And so then you can just see the annual cash flow per kilowatt load reduction. As far as the demand response programs go, that's, for those of you who are involved in that, that's a pretty hefty pay. I think the really important thing to note, though, is there's no negative if you don't meet this. This is all about paying you for that incremental load reduction that you're providing to the grid, that you're helping the grid in a situation where there is an emergency. Jessica, do you want to go to the next slide? So I know there's a lot of things on the slide. So I want to pause and make sure that you get a chance to absorb it. But this is just summarizing the things that I was just referring to, maybe adding a little bit more color to how this works. So again, it's May through October. It is available 7 days a week. Now we know some businesses aren't operating on Saturday and Sunday, but some are. So it's completely voluntary whether you participate. If you're not able to reduce load, you're not able to reduce load. The time period is 4 to 9 p.m. And the event triggers come from the CAISO. So this isn't something that PG&E is going to use for economic dispatch or for local reliability issues. This is a grid emergency. And for those of you familiar with this, they have a system called AWE, which is Alert, Warning, and Emergency Declaration. So event triggers start at the alert level and they go up to the warning level, emergency declaration. That's the only way that the ELRP can be triggered. So if you're participating in an ELRP event, you can be sure that there's a reason, right? That there's a supply shortage. Now, the way the event notification works is it can either be day ahead or day of. And I've got another slide that I'll just kind of reiterate this, but you could get an alert today that would say, please reduce tomorrow. So that's what a day ahead alert would be. It would be, hey, we think there could be a problem here, and we're going to give you an alert and ask you to prepare to reduce tomorrow. And the by 5 p.m. means if it's a day ahead, you will know by 5 p.m. today that tomorrow between 4 and 9, we'd like you to reduce. And if it goes to a warning, and these are stages, these typically go up 1, 2, 3, but there are a lot of times where maybe there isn't an alert and then there is a warning. So a warning or an emergency declaration, you're notified that day. So as soon as the CalISO would notify us, we would notify you. So just to be clear, as Peyton described earlier, we're lucky enough to be able to work with PG&E here to administer this program. So if you were participating in the program, you would be getting a text or an email from Olivine as soon as the CalISO triggered something. So on the day of, we can't guarantee what time it's going to happen. It's a warning, it's an emergency, they're worried, they're going to let you know, but it's usually not the very last minute. And so that day, as soon as we get that, we're going to let you know that from 4 to 9 that day, you're being asked if you can reduce. And it may not be the whole 5 hours. It could be a situation where there's only 1 hour or 2 hours where they need you to reduce. So anywhere between 1 hour and 5 hours between that 4 to 9 period, we would be asking you to do it. Since this isn't for economic dispatch, there could be an emergency 3 days in a row, 4 days in a row. There's no constraint on that. It could be consecutive days. However, you're not obligated to participate. If it's a hardship or you can't for some reason, you're not obligated to participate, but you will get a notice every time there is a grid emergency. Prohibitive resources, backup generation, for those of you who don't know what bugs is, allows for load reduction. And this is fairly unusual, but this is because this is an emergency program. So in a state of emergency where we have a supply shortfall, they're basically saying we need anything we can get. So if you have backup generation that you can use, and you can switch over to something that's normally prohibited, like a diesel generator, that's allowed in this circumstance. There is a test event, but you cannot use your prohibitive resource during that test event. And I don't want people to get a little too concerned about the test event, because the reality is that if you can't reduce because you can't use your backup generation, that's fine too. There's no problem with that in the test event. It's more about making sure that you're getting the communication and you possibly could do this. And if you do some reduction, you will get paid for that. As I said before too, that PG&E goes down all the way to small and medium business customers, which means that there's a minimum of 1 kilowatt. That's pretty, it should be kilowatt hour, but that's, that's pretty low. So small businesses can participate, small accounts, and there's also no cap. It can be a very large account, with a very large ability to reduce. That's fine too. As we said, there's the incentive rate is $1 per kilowatt hour. And the customer, if you are actually participating, we'll talk a little bit more about if you're going through an aggregator, you would establish a nomination and enrollment, but you also can change it throughout the period. What you could do in August may not be the same as in October. This is just to get a sense, again, it's an emergency situation and we need to kind of get a sense of how much we might be able to get from customers participating. And there's definitely no financial penalty. So if your nomination was, 25 kilowatts and you can't do it that day, there's no penalty. You obviously wouldn't get paid for something you didn't do, but there's no penalty for it. Jessica, can you keep moving? This is just a summary of that. So yes, there's 47 hours remaining. And just to give people an idea, if they're not used to what these day of alerts are from the CalISO, this is a summary. I won't read them for you, but I think you can see. So the day ahead is when you're getting that alert, and a warning and stage 1, 2, or 3 emergencies would be something in the day of situation, that this is much more, there's a much more clear issue. And so that would be done in the day of, not the day ahead. And I think we can move to the next slide. So this is just a summary of the use of backup generations to offset load during the events. So the governor's proclamation that I mentioned earlier does grant a waiver for operation of backup generation for this situation. So it's 2 hours before the event start time, during the event, and 1 hour after the event start time. So it does acknowledge that if you're getting a day ahead or even a day of, there's going to be some movement that you might have to do. You're going to have to use that generator, not at the moment the event starts. It might be 3 o'clock. It might be, 2 o'clock before the 4 o'clock start time of an event. So the governor's proclamation acknowledges that. The Bay Area Air Quality Management District also recognizes this dispensation. It does, however, expire 10/31. So the proclamation doesn't extend past that. And the participant is responsible for all the regulatory requirements. So there is this dispensation, but depending on what your specific regulatory requirements are, you would have to be responsible for that. Can we move to the next slide? Okay, enrollment, my favorite subject. As you saw on the slide earlier, there was a comment like customer or aggregator. One of the things about ELRP is, although I think the concept is very simple, that if you reduce, then you're going to get paid. The channels are fairly complex. The good news is there's lots of ways to participate, but it does make it a little bit more complex. And so I'm just going to summarize them for you. I think we're focusing on the idea of direct enrollment, which is considered A1 if you look at the ELRP, which is anybody who's a non-residential bundled or unbundled customer can directly enroll with PG&E. It can be small to medium business. There are a couple of caveats. There's no dual participation for PDP, RTP. If you're in other IOUDR programs or other CCA or third-party programs, you would have to be through, if you're in a third-party program, you would be going through an aggregator. But other than that, you can enroll directly with PG&E. If you look over there on the right, there is an aggregator enrollment. So if somebody was enrolled through an aggregator in either the CBP or the BIP program, dual participation is allowed in that case. The aggregators can enroll their entire aggregation into ELRP. So if you are already enrolled with an aggregator, you'd want to make sure and check with them to see if they've already enrolled CBP or their BIP aggregation into ELRP. There is also two other ways. There is third-party demand response. So again, if you are working with a third-party aggregator, they are allowed to participate in ELRP as well, but you wouldn't enroll directly with PG&E. Since you've enrolled with that third party aggregator would be basically eligible to enroll their portfolio. And last but not least, if you are a customer with existing Rule 21 agreements, there is a way to do export or VPP. And I think that's going to get, probably we're not going to discuss a lot of that here unless somebody later has some questions about it. But I think I would say that that's going to get more robust by next year. But there is a method to allow people to, as long as they have existing Rule 21 agreements, to allow export energy. And PDP dual participation is allowed with the export. So let's move on to the next slide. And I think I'll turn it over to Brian. He's going to talk a bit more about common load reduction strategies and some of the more details about the program.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Beth. So yeah, let me talk about some common load reduction strategies. And before I get into some of the strategies, just want to acknowledge that there isn't necessarily a right answer for how your business chooses to go about load reduction. For your business or the facilities that you have, there are very likely varying levels of operational needs that need to be met. Business continuity that needs to be maintained. So a strategy that may work for one business, for example, I'll throw out a grocery store cycling their refrigeration. That may work great for a grocery store because they can maintain a temperature range on their products, and that would work well for a grocery store. However, that same strategy, cycling of refrigeration, perhaps may not work for a company such as a biotech lab, where the tolerances to keep cultures at a specific temperature are much more strict. At the end of the day, the demand response measures that will allow you to reduce your load draw from the grid while simultaneously enabling you to ensure your business continuity that's what's going to be, the best measure for your organization. So let me start off at the top here with some of the very general strategies that are probably applicable to most customers here. And that is, has to do with their HVAC system. Whether cycling or pre-cooling, HVAC load is quite significant, a source of load for most customers. So any opportunities to, shift the HVAC usage outside of event hours, that would be pretty solid load reduction. Another one is, as Beth mentioned, ELRP is unique in that we actually do allow for the use of backup generators to be used to supplement your load. So to the extent that you do have backup generation on site and can, fire up those generators, that is also a surefire way to, deliver reliable demand response. I put backup generator here, but I know a lot of customers nowadays are also adopting battery storage at their facilities to manage their energy usage using batteries. So if you do have batteries at your facility as well, and to the extent that those can be used to offset additional load, that is also a really good way to go. Getting more specialized into the sectors, I have a few sectors highlighted here. And again, these are quite general recommendations. Obviously, whether these work for your organization is going to depend on, the operations of your organization. But for data centers, power capping is a method that we've seen which reduces just kind of the amount of work that's being done during event hours, any rescheduling of tests or procedures that don't, negatively impact business continuity. Those have been seen as strategies. In manufacturing, any processes that you can shift outside of the event hours, that would be, one ideal way to go about it. And it's great because it's not like you have to cut that process out entirely. Schedule allowing, you can just shift that work to a different time. Regarding the hospitality sector, HVAC set points is definitely a big one there. There's a lot of HVAC at hospitality centers, and really any non-essential loads that we can reduce or turn off during that time. Again, that contributes to your load reduction strategy. Next slide, please. So, we've brainstormed some ideas on what you can implement as a load reduction strategy. The next step here is to kind of quantify that into what we call a nomination. And Beth touched on this as well, but you can think of a nomination as essentially, how much load you can, quote unquote, commit to reducing during event hours. And I say quote unquote commit because, again, this is a voluntary program with no non-performance penalties. So again, it's just to give us an idea of what we can expect in terms of performance when we call on the ELRP event. So that is why we asked for that nomination. One detail I do want to highlight, and this is definitely more relevant if you do choose to pursue the ELRP, as part of the enrollment process, we do ask for the nomination, and there are implications on your incentive payment for what you choose your nomination to be. Essentially, there is a 50 to 200% band on the incentive, which is based off your nomination quantity. So I think Beth said this earlier, if you aren't able to perform at least 50% of your nomination, then there is no payment in that case. So again, this is a detail that will become more pertinent if you do choose to pursue the ELRP. But what I want to illustrate here with this example, and I have 3 scenarios here, A, B, and C. I am holding the customer performance at 400 kW for an hour. I'm holding that variable constant across the 3 scenarios. And I want to illustrate here that, holding the performance constant across the scenarios, but varying what the nomination quantities that the participant has chosen, that does impact your ultimate payment. So for example, scenario A, again, we're holding the 400 kW performance as constant. And in this case, the customer nominated a megawatt. So the customer said we can deliver a megawatt of load reduction when events are called. 400 kW is obviously less than 50% of a megawatt. So in that case, they did not clear that 50% lower threshold. Thus, there is no compensation. For scenario B, this time we're saying the customer's chosen nomination is actually 100 kW. And again, customer performed 400 kW. So in this case, the customer actually far exceeded what they said they would commit to, performing 400% above their nomination in this case. 400 is above the 200% band, so we do cap it at 200% there. So you can see in the actual payment calculation, we are using 200 kW as the credited incremental load reduction there. And then the final scenario here, it's kind of like Goldilocks and 3 bears. This is the middle one that fits just right. The nomination is 300 kilowatts with 400 performance. That is well within the 50 to 200% band. So you do just get paid the full 400 kW worth of reduction there. Next slide, please. So once you've decided you have a kind of a game plan for your load reduction, you've quantified that into a nomination. Now we can talk about actually enrolling into the ELRP. And as Beth mentioned earlier, there are multiple channels for customers to enroll in the ELRP, the direct enrollment channel and the aggregator. So let me start on the direct enrollment channel first. Essentially, Olivine, who is our program implementer, we do have a website stood up. You can see the URL right there. On that website, there is the ability to enroll where it says enroll now. There's also FAQs on there and contact information if perhaps you want to look those over or have any follow-up questions. But essentially, the process is fairly straightforward for direct enrollment. In fact, feedback we've received thus far from some of the enrollments is that actually the enrollment process here was a little easier than they had anticipated. For better or worse, traditional DR programs enrollment process isn't always as straightforward. But for ELRP, knowing that we want these megawatts for emergency situations, we are really trying to make it as simple as possible to facilitate that enrollment. To give you a little bit of a sneak peek, information that I would recommend collecting up front if you do want to pursue enrollment is your PG&E account number, the meter numbers for the sites that you wish to enroll. If you do intend to use backup generators, the nameplate ratings of those generators, the fuel source, and then again, have your nomination per site ready. Next slide, please. And then the aggregator enrollment. So like Beth touched on, PG&E has existing demand response programs, the capacity bidding program, CBP, and we also have the base interruptible program, BIP, as part of our kind of core DR programs. And for these programs, we do partner up with aggregators. So the aggregators that you see on screen here, these are partners with PG&E in that they participate in the CBP and or BIP. So if you are currently participating with one of these aggregators in CBP or BIP, again, we would recommend that you reach out to your aggregator to discuss what enrollment looks like in that case. Next slide, please. So post-enrollment, you've either gone through the direct enrollment channel or the aggregator channel, and you are now enrolled in ELRP. So in terms of what that looks like operationally, event triggers and notifications. So as Beth explained, event triggers and notifications can come either on a day ahead basis or on the day of. These notifications primarily will come through email. It will always come through at least email. If you would like to also receive notifications through SMS text, that is also something we can support as well, which is optional. Day ahead notifications, and what you see on the right side of the screen here is just an example of what that notification will look like, right? The key points being the site, which site this notice is going out to, the event date, what day the actual event is taking place, and then the event time, the start time for the event and the end time for the event. Day ahead notifications at latest will come to participants by 5 p.m. For day of, it is a little trickier, but as Beth mentioned, we try to get those notifications out to participants as soon as we receive them, as soon as the CAISO publishes that public notice. Generally, as a rule of thumb, we try to aim for at least 2 to 3 hours of lead time for these day of. That's kind of the lead time that we've been able to provide for events that have already happened this year, day of events that have already happened this year. So that's kind of just a rule of thumb, but no guarantees there. Next slide, please. Great. So, you got your event notification, you reduced load during the specified time period. So now after the fact, we need to essentially calculate what was your performance, what was your load reduction during the event hours, as that informs, how much you are paid in incentives. So in the world of demand response, the 10 and 10 baseline methodology is pretty ubiquitous, and that is also what we are using to measure performance here for the ELRP. So I have an example here, which I will walk through. But essentially, for my example, I'm going to put a hypothetical event day of June 4th, 2021. And I'm saying for this event, it's going to occur between the hours of 6 to 8 p.m. So directing your attention to the first image here, creating the energy baseline. Again, we know that our event date is on June 4th, which I will mention is a weekday. So for here, we will go back and pick 10 similar days in the past. And by similar, what that means is if the event is a weekday, then the days we will pick will also be weekdays. If the event happens to fall on a weekend, in this case, we actually only need to pick 4, and that's just because there are fewer weekends than there are weekdays. But we will pick 4 similar weekends if the event is actually on a weekend. So in this example here, you can see that the dates picked are starting from June 3rd, June 2nd, June 1st. And if you can see those are all past weekdays. So we take the load profiles for each of those days and essentially do a straight average, which is what you would get on the darker blue line, the energy baseline, which is just a simple average of the load profiles across those 10 days. So I'm going to take our energy baseline, the darker blue line, and I'm going to translate that down to the second image where we'll talk about the unadjusted energy baseline. So the blue baseline, it's the same line across the image 1 and 2. I'm just pulling it down. But for image 2, I'm also overlaying the actual day of load for this hypothetical facility. So the line in orange here is what the participants' load looked like on June 4th. You can see between the hours of 6 to 8, which is the event hours, there is a noticeable drop. So that's great to see. That means this customer was responsive to the event. What I do want to highlight on image 2 here is where you see the circle. So you do see a bit of a delta between the baseline and the actual event day load. And this is not uncommon. Again, the baseline is just a simple average of 10 past similar days. So it's not likely that those 10 days that we've picked are always going to be representative and match create a perfect baseline essentially. So there is oftentimes a delta, but what we do to minimize that delta, moving on to the image 3, is we apply what we call a day of adjustment. And essentially you can see with the day of adjustment, we are able to shift the baseline up to 40%. So that it matches a lot closer. So now the baseline is much more representative of kind of your actual event day load. So now that we've adjusted our baseline, the performance is the difference between the baseline and the event day load in the shaded 6 to 8 area. So, the area under the blue line but above the orange line, that is your KWH in terms of what you reduce during the event hours, and that is what is compensated at the dollar per KWH. Next slide, please. So that baseline methodology is probably the 10 and 10 is going to be what applies to your specific situation. For customers who are dually enrolled in the base interruptible program and the ELRP, there is a nuance in the calculation though. For BIP, for those that are familiar, there is this concept known as the firm service level. And essentially that is a preset quantity which you commit to reducing your load down to. So that's BIP, that's a different program. But for customers who do choose to participate in both programs, the key takeaway here is that in order to prevent double compensation for the dual participation, only what we call the incremental load reduction is compensated at the $1 per kWh for ELRP. So looking at this image here, we can see again, we've got kind of a normal operating conditions, the baseline in the blue, and the actual event day load in the orange. And right at 85 kilowatts there's this gold line that runs across, and that is what we're saying is the firm service level for this example. So, as part of your BIP commitment, you reduce down to your firm service level. In this case, you can see there is further load reduction below the firm service level. And that's what we're calling incremental, right? Because it's incremental to what you've committed to BIP. And in this case, it's the incremental piece that is compensated at $1 per kWh. So the area between the gold line and the orange line is what is compensated in this scenario. And again, this only applies if you are dual participating in the base interruptible program and the ELRP. If you're just participating in the ELRP, it's going to use the 10 and 10 baseline methodology, which we talked about previously. Next slide, please. Great. So, now that we've been able to calculate performance, now we're able to quantify that into what we call a settlement, or you can also think of it as this is the incentive payment. Again, all of the incremental load reduction is compensated at $1 per kWh. And again, noting that there is that compensation band of 50 to 200%. So payments for this program will be made twice per program season for events that occurred in May, June, and July. And I know we're past this, so this is going to be less applicable to this group. Payments are going to be made by September 30th of this year as well. The part that is going to be more applicable to this group, events that occur between August and October, participants can expect to receive payments for that by the end of this year, December 31st. And as part of receiving your payment, you all will also receive kind of in the invoice statement, you will be able to see how we got to those payment numbers. So you will be able to see your performance for each event, which is calculated based on those methodologies we previously mentioned. So you will have the ability to kind of look at the numbers and reconcile those to make sure those fit with your expectations. Next slide, please. So this is my last slide here, and I just wanted to leave with resources for those who have an interest in ELRP. Again, we do have the webpage, which has the frequently asked questions, and that's also where you can go to initiate the enrollment process. We do have a support email, pgne-elrp@olavininc.com, should you have any questions that arise in any step of the process. And there is also the support phone number as well. Also, for those who have PG&E account managers, all of our account managers have been briefed on this program. So if you have questions, also feel free to reach out to your account manager and raise questions to them. Be happy to walk through any of your questions. And to the extent that they need some demand response subject matter experts on the call, they also have those available to them. So with that, I think we can go ahead and open it up to the Q&A. So I am going to pull up the Q&A chat and take a look at what kind of questions we've got. Great, so let me see. Yeah, so the first question, and I'm gonna group these first two, but really related to how load serving entities are involved in the ELRP. How do they know when events have been called, and how far in advance can they know when events are called? So let me address that first. Again, it's really the participants who are enrolling in the program. So the lines of communications are really from PG&E or Olivine as our implementer to the customer, or in the case of aggregator enrollment, we send the event notices to the aggregator, who then relay those to their customers. But essentially, in terms of how customers will know when events are called, again, there was that slide that shows an example event notice. So that is what a customer should receive to be notified when events are called. In terms of the time frame, again, the program can either be called on a day ahead basis or a day of. Just given the nature of grid emergencies and how they can be unpredictable at times, the CAISO doesn't really have a way to say 100% give guidance on that on the 100% in the day ahead. So to the extent that they are able to forecast that out, they do try to send out that day ahead notice, because we understand that, or everyone understands that, the more lead time participant has, kind of the more success that puts them in a better position to actually reduce their load. But in the case that the CAISO is not able to forecast that far out, day of is when you would expect to receive those notifications. And again, we try to give like 2 to 3 hours of lead time to the extent possible.
Ryan, could I add something to that?
Please.
Because I think it covers some of the others. The intention is that there's no restriction in being able to subscribe to the CAISO AWE system. So even though the communications would be directly with the customers for all the reasons Brian pointed out, CCAs, LSEs, they can all subscribe to the CAISO AWE system and see when those notices go out. They won't be parties to the specific communication, but they can actually see the triggers themselves. And so I think that might be helpful for some of the people on the call.
Yeah, thank you, Beth. And for the question regarding, which customers can be participants in the ELRP, again, the eligibility criteria is really what filters, which customers are eligible there. So to the extent that customers meet those requirements, they would be eligible to participate. I do see a question. Let me see what's the next one. How does the Bay Area AQMD feel out bugs during emergency timeframe? Dennis, so I'm going to interpret this as what is their sentiment toward bugs? If you could maybe, if I'm getting that wrong, feel free to kind of repost the question. But yeah, these grid emergencies, these are statewide issues. And as kind of made evident by the governor's emergency proclamation, there is awareness across the state and across the agencies of the situations that are, occurring on the grid. So while use of backup generators, it does go counter to kind of the emissions reductions goals that the state has. However, it is balancing that out against, maintaining system reliability and preventing, situations where we would need to do rotating outages. So to that extent, the Bay Area AQMD is, complying with kind of the direction set out through the proclamation. But yeah, that is a little tough though. It is kind of in between a rock and a hard place in terms of balancing bug use as well as maintaining reliability. Okay. Another question, if I am not a registered aggregator, but have multiple clients who would like to sign up for the program, what would be the best way to go about getting my client set up with my company managing the program for them? Yeah, and Beth, you can let me know if you have can add on to what I'm about to say, but I think in that case, I do encourage them to go through the direct enrollment channel, and then so the customer enrolls, and then how the customer wants to implement their load reduction. That can be the conversation and relationship they have with you as this aggregator, and you are able to assist the customer that way.
I agree. Just for whoever asked the question, I mean, the customer has the ability to determine who's going to get the notices and things like that. I mean, they're directly enrolling, and the agreement is with them. But that doesn't mean that they can't say they want notices to go to you, things like that. So there are ways for you to help manage those customers.
Mm-hmm. Great. Next question I see, is there no way to loop in CCAs on those communications? And I think this is related to the first question regarding, how do customers know when there are events? So as Beth mentioned, the CAISO AWE, those are public notices. So PG&E receives those notices the same time the general public does. So in that aspect, you can subscribe to those feeds directly from the CAISO. And if there is an alert or warning or stage, that's pretty well assured that there's also a corresponding ELRP event at that time.
I mean, it's an actual trigger, so it's not one of those things where you're like, this happened and then somebody else, you can see it as a trigger, so you can actually get the exact same notifications.
Then another question I see, I was under the impression via a discussion I had with PG&E that there would be additional charges associated with not making our target. Okay. So I will say I'm not sure what target you're referring to exactly. So you can correct me with another follow-up question if I'm missing the question here. But in terms of, targets for the ELRP, again, we do ask for a nomination, but again, that nomination is voluntary, it's non-binding, and if you don't meet that nomination, there will never be any financial penalty assessed to you for not meeting that. Again, there is that 50 to 200% band on incentives, so that is definitely something to be mindful of. falling outside of that band potentially is leaving money on the table, but that's not a penalty that PG&E assesses to the participant, where the participant has to, essentially pay us back for that non-performance.
Yeah, there's definitely no additional charges associated with this, but obviously not knowing about where the conversation was, the only thing that you might want to just keep in mind is that there are like CBP, is dual participation for CBP and BIP, and ELRP doesn't erase any penalties associated with those programs. It's just that there are no additional charges associated with the nomination for ELRP.
Yes, very, very important point there. Thank you for pointing that out, Beth.
Excellent.
So with that, yeah, I'll turn it over to Peyton.
Just seeing that we have a couple of minutes left in our window, I wanted to sort of make a last call for questions and see if there are any final thoughts that folks have. If not, we can start to wrap up a little bit. So I wanted to go ahead and start by saying thank you very much to both you, Beth, and you, Brian, for taking the time with us today. Had a lot of really great information. I wanted to also thank everybody in attendance for coming to learn a little bit about ELRP. SVCE is going to be distributing some resources to all of those that were in attendance. So you will be getting the web link to sign up or to learn more. You'll be getting the link to the recording of the presentation and also a flyer about the program with some specifics and details. So seeing no additional questions come through, I think that we'll go ahead and make the move to wrap this up. So thanks again to both our presenters. Really great stuff.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, everybody.